Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us for this urgent panel about the Ryuk ransomware. As people come into the room here, we'll give them a few minutes. I'm Jake Milstein. I'm been a journalist for 25 years and now run marketing for CI Security, which is a cybersecurity company focused on protecting and defending critical services, including healthcare. Do a lot of work in the healthcare sector. And as we introduce the folks who are on the panel today, you'll see why and how. Really seeing the news come across last week about what was going on with the ransomware hitting hospitals around the country. Really, and being on those calls with the FBI really made us think, we should get folks together for a discussion like this, so that we can share knowledge, so we can fight the bad guys together, and make sure that that we limit the impact so far, and that we limit any impact of ransomware in the future, and hopefully, are able to catch it or stop it in other healthcare organizations. I see people are still coming into the room here, so we'll give it another few seconds and then get going. Our plan today is what we're going to do is have go through the facts, discuss, and then take questions from people as we go, which we'll talk about here in a minute. It's not an unprecedented situation, unfortunately, and it's one that many people predicted, and we'll talk about that too. But here we are. So again, now that we have more people in the room, my name is Jake Milstein, 25-year journalist, now CMO at CI Security. We're here to talk about the Ryuk ransomware in a panel discussion. The fact so far. So it's a coordinated attack targeting U.S. healthcare. At least 3 hospital chains and 20 facilities hit that we know of. Joint advisory last week from HHS and Homeland Security, which led to the FBI calls that I think most people were on in the HHS calls. It's the ransomware is the Ryuk ransomware. It's being done by a group some people call the Wizard Spider, others UNC 1878. A lot of folks have reported that they're Russian-speaking attackers, and that the attack is using standard penetration testing tools. The people who will be speaking today: Mike Hamilton, CI Security co-founder, former CISO of Seattle; Fred Langston, who's the EVP of Professional Services and contributed to the original HIPAA security rule; Drex DeFord, who advises hospitals on security, former CIO in a bunch of places, including Seattle Children's, Scripps, and Steward. And then joining us a little later in the hour will be John Rigi, who's the American Hospital Association Senior Advisor for Cybersecurity and Risk, and used to be the FBI Section Chief National Cyber Outreach. He had an urgent call right at the top of the hour, so he said he'll join us as soon as we can. We've done a lot of work with him. Really great guy. Since this is a panel discussion and not a webinar with a ton of slides, we'll have a lively chat. So put in the chat on your right any questions you have, things you'd like us to cover. We'll put in there. We'll also be putting in helpful documents and links in the chat, and at the end a survey, because we'd love to know who you are and whether this was helpful. We'd like to know whether this is the kind of thing that we should do all the time. So thank you, and thanks for joining us. Mike Hamilton, let me start with you here. Mike,
Sure.
Every morning you put out the day's news, and you've been doing it for 12 years, so you've been gathering information about this since it began. What do you know?
What looks to be a coordinated attack against hospitals, and there have been numerous reports in the media from researchers that say, some say up to 400 hospitals have been targeted, and this is from chat that they've pulled out of, dark web chats and things like that. Regardless of whether or not more are coming, it's a bunch have been hit now. And notably, there was 3 in a single county in New York. Man, that's really got to cause an impact. So again, it appears to be a coordinated attack. There's been 3, to my knowledge now, combination FBI DHS briefings. So they keep talking about TrickBot, botnet, plus the Ryuk ransomware. There's other things flavored in there too. All of these things are really multi-stage, and there's a lot of components, but those are the 2 that are really worth everybody's attention. Again, the UNC 1878 or whatever it is, that's a name that was chosen by Mandiant. Thank you, Mandiant, for not calling it something like Wizard Spider. And apparently somebody else has called it Wizard Spider. So it's got a name. So now it's the real deal. It's really interesting to me that Microsoft, not only because of this event, but because of what happened state, local government, specifically Washington State, a few weeks ago, now maybe 6 weeks ago, they are working really hard with the Department of Defense to knock down the TrickBot botnet. I think that has bearing here in what they think may be coming. They're working so hard to do this. You, I think, may have made a little note of this, Jake. It actually looks too like it's there could be some third party involved. So they're either compromising individual healthcare organizations one by one, or there was a certain common service provider that's now being used to facilitate that access. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But we've seen too many things go by lately where there was a third party involved. So I'll stop there. That's a lot of what we know right now. And right now there's a bit of waiting going on to see if there's another shoe that's going to drop.
And, Fred, we had talked before about the attackers using penetration testing tools. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll talk about it kind of overall, because it's like Mike said, it's a multi-stage attack. In fact, 13 stages once TrickBot finally gets a foothold. So TrickBot is basically the foothold that usually comes from somebody clicking on a phishing email. The system gets infected. It's a remote access Trojan. So it allows the attackers to start doing things. And that's where they start planting things on the network. Some of the things are what they use to communicate with. For example, it uses DNS as its initial command and control communication channel. So regular old DNS, very hard to spot unless you're watching it. And then it starts using, as you're alluding to, Jake, most of the pretty common tools that, frankly, my pen test team uses right now. They're using Empire, Mimikatz, Cobalt Strike, Bloodhound. It's the standard toolkit, right? They work well. They're using them to expand influence, harvest credentials, exfiltrate data, build more backdoors. But what they're ultimately getting to is the Ryuk component, and that is the ransomware. And so a really advanced team will exfiltrate data to use against you if, in fact, you catch it before they execute the Ryuk component. Ryuk is actually the encryption set of things that happen and do a bunch of bad things. But once Ryuk has taken hold, you're in cleanup, you're in recovery mode. If you can catch it at TrickBot, when TrickBot is the only thing that's actually running, you have a chance of stopping this. And there are some things to look at. For example, in DNS, you can use an XOR key of a specific hex number, 0xB9, and it will give you what those records look like and whether they tie to the anchor DNS command and control system. So,
and Anthony asks in the chat here, 13 stages, where are the stages listed? Do you have that somewhere?
I do, and it came out in a couple of places. One was a joint CISA, Department of Health and Human Services, multi-state ISAC document. I'll post that into the chat here in a bit. It's a fantastic piece of work, really exhaustive, and frankly, I'm probably stealing from it most of this talk because it's a really good document.
Great, thank you. And Nathan asks, industry alerts seem to primarily call out hospitals as the target, but also other healthcare organizations. Have you seen primarily hospitals or other healthcare organizations as well?
So I was on one of the calls, one of the FBI calls, and there was a person on there from Homeland Security who was focused on medical devices, right? So the Internet of Medical Things. And what they said was no signal there yet. So that's something. But I will say that this particular, gang, organization, corporation, whatever it is, they really go after high value targets that are so critical that if they are operationally disrupted at all, they have to get back to work so fast, they're very likely to pay the ransom, right? So, this is a calculation that's gone on. So when you talk about the different kinds of health sector institutions, a critical access facility is probably not where they're going to go. Seattle Children's, that's probably where they're going to go.
And John Ricci is joining us now. John, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So, John, you came in just at the right time. We're talking about the attacks at this point and what we know. So reintroducing John. John is basically head of cybersecurity for the American Hospital Association. And so John, from your standpoint, one of the questions that just came up is this primarily attack on hospitals or all healthcare organizations? What do you know?
It's so primarily from what I'm hearing direct from the Bureau and DHS is that it's primarily aimed at hospitals. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, hospitals are in a much more urgent position to pay, right, to preserve patient care and safety. And there's some chatter out there I've seen and heard that part of the plan here is not just the economics, but also to sow chaos. And again, you don't know if that's bravado, and where some of these folks that are in these chat rooms are making those statements. And I have some thoughts on that later on. I'll talk about when from a strategic threat perspective, where that might be coming on. But so far, what I'm hearing is hospitals. One other thing I spoke to the Bureau directly about this was there's this talk of a list of 400 hospitals on the list. Just want to clarify, according to the FBI and DHS and folks that used to have my job that I used to have when I was at the Bureau, whose job was to produce bulletins that like that one that came out. There is no list of 400 that the FBI has. Again, you hear chat, you hear folks about that, and it's in the interest perhaps of certain private security organizations to repeat that. And maybe somebody said it, but you don't know if it's true. It's like when the bad guys are on the phones. And just to reassure folks there, if in fact the FBI had a list of 400 hospitals, they have a duty to warn, a legal duty to warn potential victims. And when I was there, we used to do 200-300 a month. So they take that very seriously. Now, absence of a list doesn't mean, rest assured, it just means everybody's a target.
And so, Drex, from your standpoint, you've been in that CIO seat in a bunch of different places. You hear all this. You're not a hospital that's been hit at this point. What are you wondering?
I'm first of all, I want to make sure that my leadership team knows it. So all the other executives in the suite are aware, they understand what's happening, and we start to talk about what does our incident response plan look like? If they've not been involved, in my case, they were very involved, but for anyone out there, hospital or standalone clinic, whatever the case may be, you should always be putting yourself in this position to be prepared for an incident and know what you're going to do, because a lot of this is an open book test. There are things the marketing people should be doing. There are things the chief medical officer should do. There are things right on down the line. All of your executives should be involved in these exercises. And so coming to them with this kind of information is really a situation where you're amping up your internal alert and you're just saying, please spread the news. Please spread the message. There's a lot going on right now. We need to be really aware. Tell your employees not to be afraid to call us if they think they clicked on something maybe they shouldn't have. Don't have any fear of that. That's not about you getting in trouble. That's about us being protected. And never waste a good crisis. This is a great opportunity to be able to get your team on the same page with the work that you're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of what hospitals should be doing right now and what healthcare organizations should be doing, I think those are all really good things, from the IT or CISO perspective. I'm sure John and Fred and Mike all have thoughts on that. John, let's start with you. What is the AHA telling hospitals to do right now?
So based on the urgency of the bulletins that came out, first of all, we're saying take this seriously. I know, obviously, from my time at the Bureau in the intelligence community, to see a bulletin come out this quickly, and it did come out fairly quickly, under 3 seal. All right, so you have DHS, CISO, FBI, and HHS. The amount of interagency coordination that it takes to put that together usually takes weeks. So for them to turn it around in 48 hours or so, gives you an indication of the gravity of the threat. So take it seriously. There are some things that are contained in this alert that were placed there for specific reasons. When I read this, I said, all right, they're focused on having their initial is testing your incident response plan within 24 hours. I told the Bureau, I said, listen, you can say that. Realistically, it's just not going to happen. Disconnecting services, non-essential services from the internet. Some organizations are doing that. So I see that again indicates the severity of the threat. Test that incident response plan, just even as simple as making sure that your call tree is up to date. And I've talked to CEOs who are calling me saying, John, how serious is this? I said, it's pretty serious. You need to take it seriously. And then I can't stress this enough, the backup security, the security around the backups. Because ultimately, if you are hit, your only way to overcome this is your ability to restore from backup and to understand what the remote connections are into that backup. We've seen a number of these attacks that start with a vendor that has compromised credentials and has access to the backups, redundant copies. And then the other thing I tell, okay, so you got backups. And then when the bad guys say, unless you pay us $10 million, and the boss asks, well, how long is it going to take us? You say, good news, ma'am, we can restore. I said, and she asked, how long will it take us? You say, well, we're not quite sure. We've never tested.
Never done it before. Yeah.
Restore. And it might take us 10 or 15 days. So what's your cost during that time? And all those things. And can you restore fully? Or are you going to be missing 30 days worth of data? Or how much? Not advocating you should pay. Certainly not. But those are the considerations. They have to be ready. Backups, incident response plan, disconnect regional, non-essential services, and be ready for a potential regional impact. That's a twist that we had not seen before, something I've always worried about. If you have multiple hospitals in the same region that are impacted at the same time, that affects your emergency response plan and continuity of operations plan. There may not be other nearby hospitals to divert ambulances to. They may be in the same situation.
And Mike, I know you and Fred worked on a document last week that we sent to customers, and we, some of our recommendations. What do you have to add there?
Well, some of the recommendations come straight from the flash in the DHS, FBI, HHS bulletin. And like John, I thought a couple of things really jumped out at me. A few of these, in fact, most of these are the standard stuff, right? If you've been putting off patches and updates, stop putting that off. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And I think specifically, it didn't call it out, but specifically, there's a couple of vulnerabilities that are seriously bad in that anyone with any toehold on your network at all can completely take over your domain with administrative privileges without even using any tools. It's that easy. It's called the zero logon vulnerability. But so, okay, patch the stuff that you haven't patched, pretty straightforward. Backups, pretty straightforward. I will say that backups are your fail-safe to avoid paying a ransom. I'll also say that if you actually get encrypted, your first phone call is to your insurance company, and they're calling the plays from that point on. And so if you have good backups, they may say, it's going to be cheaper for us to help you put your network back together than it is to gamble and pay the ransom. That's why those backups are really important. But I do want to emphasize the insurance company is calling the plays at that point. One thing that they said in these bulletins that really jumped out at me, and I jump up and down about it all the time: limit staff use of personal email. They're trying to tell us something there. Okay. It's always, this stuff starts with somebody tripping over something they think is a legitimate document that they have to get access to. And so they're going to give a password. You give a password, somebody strolls into your network, lays the bomb, lights the fuse. So specifically with that recommendation right there, they're sending a strong message. I thought the other strong message was, how did they word this? Yes, be prepared to reroute patients. Be prepared to operate in the absence of an IP network. That is different. They're telling people, get your disaster recovery business continuity plans up to speed, such that falling back to number 2 pencil and paper is a practiced technique. So, in addition to these simple things, there's a paper that we contributed to that you probably have a link for it somewhere. Jake, you're the marketing guy.
Yep, and I'll put that link in the chat here. Fred, did you have anything you want to add?
Well, I'd say that a lot of people are always thinking about, well, can I stop this before it happens, right? And Mike mentioned pretty much it's the same laundry list of things we tell everybody, patch, training, all those sorts of things. But there is a level of monitoring that you can increase to hopefully find evidence of this kind of malicious activity before it becomes a ransomware event. Because you can stop these things. The residence time that we see most of the time in our ransomware investigations is up to a week, maybe even a little longer, sometimes 11 days before they actually do the ransomware, because they want to steal data first, right? Because if they steal the data, they either sell it if it's healthcare data, or they ransom it back after. If you beat them and stop the encryption event, they're still going to try to extort you by selling your data on the black market. So there's a lot that happens before we're even getting to it's ransomware. Those are the things we need to get better at. And frankly, it's people really learning how to deal with these things and interpret signals that are not normally unusual, but can be in this instance.
Speaking of that, what are the indicators that this is in your system?
So there are a lot of really highly technical ones, kind of a couple I mentioned, like that DNS. If you XOR a particular record and find anchor DNS in there, that's a real good sign that you're communicating with command and control. But there's things just like a lot more data all of a sudden exfiltrating out to IP addresses that your firewall has never communicated with before. Or maybe it's a lot of stuff going up to G Suite, and you don't use G Suite. This could be your data being exfiltrated. So seeing large, unusual things happening on your network is a common precursor to people executing the ransomware stage of the attack. So but there are specific indicators, and if you want to dig into some of the more technical materials, they go pretty in depth. They're pretty good.
And they've released indicators, right? We found some open source indicators that we thought were this Wizard Spider group, and it was they were done by some researchers that are fairly well regarded. So before the FBI released indicators, we had some, and now, so indicators, the simple way to think of an indicator: here's an IP address, don't talk to it. So, these are good to put in as block lists, but also good to use, as Fred says, for your monitoring. Has anybody been talking to these? Notably, if your DNS server looks up one of the domain names on the list, something is wrong. Something is trying to progress to the next stage. So I think a good recommendation too is, this is not the kind of thing that you can change overnight, but if you allow all the users and all their devices on your network to contact internet DNS servers, you're doing it wrong. You need to have an internal network an internal DNS server. Everybody talks to that, and that will proxy the requests. So your network architecture is kind of in scope here too, and the infrastructure services and how you put those together. If you use that standard of practice, your threat surface has come down, and that's because of the use of DNS in these communications.
Hey, Mike, I was thinking back to something that you were talking about earlier, and that was the go back to pen and paper, the business continuity part of this. Mm-hmm. For organizations that haven't done that and haven't practiced that can, I'm just telling you from experience, that can be a real challenge because first of all,
doctors can't write.
And it's finding the forms that have been online now for 10 years. It's finding a calculator, which, maybe you have it on your phone, but it's just, there are lots of things like that. We used to put together these little rescue boxes on each unit that had forms and pens and pencils and erasers. And these things just don't exist anymore. They've all been swept out of closets and thrown away. And so you really need to practice this stuff. The people who are really good at it, if there's anybody good at it in your healthcare organization, are the people who work the overnight shift, the nurses who work mids, because whenever you take your scheduled downtimes now, you take them during that shift. So those people know better than anybody else about how to operate when the EHR is offline. The people who work day shift just completely seize up as soon as something happens. So make sure you're tapping into those resources, you're tapping into those individuals to help coach you through what are the things how do we order meds and get stuff back and forth from the pharmacy or from the lab when we don't have a method to do that is the electronic health record. It's a super complicated process. You can continue for a while, but even then, you will discover that you can go paperless only for a certain period of time. And then the production line becomes so confused and so complicated that you really have to make the decision about diverting patients, which gets to the other point. And that was John's point about regional coordination and the threat that we already see where multiple hospitals in the same county or multiple hospitals in the same region are going offline at the same time. They're all being hit at the same time. This is a part of your exercise process, your exercise program as you do all of that work. Don't do it just for your hospital. Make sure you bring in the other organizations into your region so that you know how you're going to respond should there be a regional incident. We do that today when we prepare for the Joint Commission and we do things like mass casualty exercises. But I'm a big believer that some of those exercises that we do today in our hospitals to prepare for Joint Commission, as much as ever, should be system outages and system downtimes now, ransomware attacks. We should really be putting those scenarios into our hospital exercise programs.
Throw COVID on top of that. That's a whole other challenge to mix in there that we're not even don't know how to deal with it. So,
I mean, COVID has made it even more complicated, right? Because for the last 9 months, we have done a lot of things to create exceptions to the rules that we had, even when we had good cybersecurity programs. We've brought in new equipment from the outside. We've connected to new suppliers. We've sent thousands of employees to work from home. We've hired travelers where we've put them on the network and given them a broad amount of access. We've changed people who work in our health system today to have more access than they ever had before because we're using them in different ways. And we've done things like add new points of care, like drive-through testing and things like that. So we've created, in the hustle of making sure we can accomplish the mission, we've created a lot of exceptions to the rules that we had around cybersecurity. And that makes for a cyber gold rush for the bad guys, right? There's lots of opportunity.
And so two things here. One, just a reminder to people that in the chat, there are a couple of helpful documents that we've been talking about. Also, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll make sure we answer them. We've been talking about sort of what happens if you get hit with this thing. The pen and paper, what to do. But, John, obviously the American Hospital Association, has members that have been hit. If this is in your system, if you get hit by it, what do you do right then?
Yeah, at that point, if you know it's in the system, beyond, obviously taking the technical measures to try to isolate, contain where it is, bringing systems offline, again, to try to isolate, because as I understand, it does propagate pretty rapidly. And so at that point, decisions have to be made in terms of what is the clinical impact. Does it threaten clinical care? Can you start shutting down systems? Worst case scenario, and I drill this with leaders, is it okay, 30 seconds, who's going to make the call to disconnect the entire organization from the internet? Who's going to make that call quickly? And of course, usually they don't have that pre-programmed in. And I say, okay, you're designated, who has delegated authority if we can't reach you? And so those big types of issues, yes, call your insurance company. I do want to comment, your insurance company, yes, they'll run the show, but you do have a choice whether to pay or not pay. I mean, ultimately, that's probably going to be the CEO and the board to make that call and understand what the cost is of paying or not paying. Contact law enforcement. I can't stress that enough. Contact the FBI and CISO. If either one, whoever you contact first, should be in touch with the other one. For some reason, you need a trust, you can't figure out how to navigate that, call us at the American Hospital Association. These are all my former and current colleagues. We'll plug you right in. The reason is they can help you understand how the malware behaves, who the actors are, and if you're in negotiations with them, again, negotiations, buy time and try to reduce the amount, just as we would do in a physical hostage type situation. And the FBI can help you with that. I know the insurance company has negotiators. They'll do that as well. But there's intelligence that can be collected through those negotiations. The FBI and DHS and HHS can use to identify who these guys are, identify their infrastructure, and help protect the rest of the community. So, and ultimately, they're not going to tell you, you can't pay or not pay. That's the business decision that has to be made.
And Fred, I know your incident response team, is thinking about this a lot too. So ransomware gets into your system. What do you do from their standpoint?
Yeah, so that's worst case. When we get to the stage where it is ransomware, it's usually what is your recovery mechanisms? There's really little you can do. But the one thing that's always a problem is you still need to do a full investigation to find other signs of persistence, whether they got into the backups, which maybe versions of the backups are clean. There's still an enormous amount of work that has to go in to verify what's still safe. And the reality is we might not be able to do a great job on saying what that is, and living with a little bit of risk is not anybody's all that comfortable with. So it's a challenge, but really once it gets to encryption, you're to the point of recovery and looking for how to fix the problem going forward.
Drex, thoughts?
No, I think, Fred's right on the money. Once this starts to happen, I always want to say transparency is your best friend. You want to let people know that there's something going on and something happening, but this is the point at which you really have to make this is where your exercises come in super handy, because you've gone through that scenario. You've drafted messages and written notes to the press and all the other things that you should do. You want to get the word out. You just have to be very thoughtful and careful about what you say. So, the best time for you to have an incident response plan and have exercised it thoroughly is 2 years ago. And the second best time is right now. Get on it.
And Mike, one of the things you mentioned earlier is third parties. That this could be getting in directly, or it could be getting in through a third party. One, do we know if it's gotten into essentially any third parties? And two, if it does, what if it got into one of your vendors, then what?
Well, if it got into one of your vendors, you want to see what kind of access that vendor has to your own network, number one. But let me say, I don't think anybody knows that there's a third party implicated, but 3 hospitals in a single county in New York, come on. They could have been individually targeted. Yeah, it's true. But I think it is not a bad assumption to make that there was a common service provider between the three.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of thing that smart people are probably looking at right now. I want to look back on something John said, because he said something very intriguing when he got here, and I think this deserves more conversation than it's had, because of the timing and because of the intent of nation states to let's say unravel the social fabric of the United States. This seems just awful coincidental, and even if organized crime is making lots and lots and lots of money, there's still some kind of ethical questions they need to ask, right? So the person that died at the hospital in Germany, right away that ransomware gang gave them the decryption key, because they knew, we went for a university, it bled over into a hospital, we can't have that happen. So somebody who is intentionally doing this, and there's coincidentally there is this geographic distribution signature there. And John, I know you can't tell things you're not supposed to tell, but I'm interested in that conversation.
Well, Mike, you're a very astute man, of course. And again, I only offer opinions these days, but I tread lightly because I know that could unintentionally stray into some classified area. But I mean, let's just look at it from an outside perspective. So we have seen since September ransomware attacks, Ryuk in particular, increasing and targeting hospitals. You had UHS, Universal Health. You had a whole series in Nebraska. I'm aware of others in New Mexico and Washington State as well. So then suddenly it seemed like the pace of attacks were increasing a bit more. And come October, we have the offensive action taken by Cyber Command and Microsoft to take down botnet. I don't know if you guys saw, but also that day, the day after, the FBI announced the indictment of 6 Russian military GRU officers, intelligence officers, for their role in the Petya Not Petya ransomware, destructive malware. Other issues going after the election system, targeting the Ukraine power outage. This is all stuff when I was at the FBI, was highly classified. We have it out in an indictment now, which is great. And then, as you said, Mike, for these groups to operate, the Russian-speaking groups, to go after hospitals, knowing that the attention that'll draw from the U.S. intelligence community, in the military, in the public outcry, there seems to be something more than economics driving that. And of course, we know, based on previous indictments, that Russian organized crime groups have often, historically, collaborated with the Russian intelligence services. So I think I was quoted in the press. I think that what I said was the timing is very interesting, given election cycle, given the offensive action that's happening. So that's all lends more to the severity of the potential threat. This, could be some type of could be speculation, some type of hybrid threat between criminal groups and nation state actor.
I don't think we can ignore the fact that there's a pandemic going on too.
Exactly.
And knocking down hospitals during a pandemic is somebody's going to hell. I mean, come on.
Well, listen, you get my support. When I say it's the COVID-induced triple threat, like you guys said, expanded attack surface right now, increased attacks, hospitals have reduced revenue. It's even against the Geneva Convention and all types of international norms that you don't attack a hospital during a time of war. And we're doing this during a pandemic.
Well, that's kind of why I think it might be actually monetarily motivated. I think Microsoft might have just kicked them at exactly the wrong time, and they figured it's time to make hay, or we lose all this work we put in. And I'm not discounting it was just bad timing that Microsoft thought it was going to be used to disrupt the election. These guys were just actually staging up a bunch of ransomware attacks and had to pull the trigger.
The other part that I wonder about is talking about third parties. We've seen also situations like BlackBot, where organizations don't realize how much information they're putting into third-party systems like that. That is really a customer relationship management system. targeted at donors for hospitals, but it turned out there was some clinical information that was put into those systems about patients. And it was enough that not only there's several hospitals now that had to go out to all of those patients and families and donors and say, we may have breached some information in your records. When you look at health systems, part of the challenge too isn't just that you may be breaching an operational electronic health record or other system, but there's a lot of analytics work going on right now where really smart people in independent departments and researchers are taking data from those systems of record, those actual business or clinical systems, and putting them into a database that they're using for analytics. Those databases are just as valuable or maybe even more valuable than accessing the electronic health record itself, because somebody's taken the time to actually clean that data, consolidate it from other systems, and do other work that makes the data even more interesting. The challenge in all of this is that sometimes if you don't have good data governance, you don't know that those databases even exist. And this is why I think you see health systems being overly cautious when it comes to notifying patients and families that their records may have been breached. So there's two big things there. One is, I think third parties, there's a lot of cloud service providers that you can almost buy on a credit card if you're a department manager that may have information in those cloud services that somebody centrally isn't tracking. So you may get breached that way. The attack surfaces is so broad right now that we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble.
So one of the questions that came up in the chat here that I want to make sure we get to, we're talking about Ryuk here, which John pronounced Ryuk, and he probably knows better than I do how to pronounce it. But this isn't, healthcare is not the only sector hit recently by Ryuk. Steelcase, a huge manufacturing company, furniture giant. That article was just last week. So John, looking, I know you work for the American Hospital Association now, but, is there any commonality between it, it hitting different industries?
One of the things I think that there's been a lot of talk about is that this has been somewhat commoditized prior, the ransomware, Ryuk commoditized, and it was offered as ransomware as a service type. So it was out there on the web. There could have been other folks that had other targets in mind. And, again, it's an opportunistic crime, absent what's going on right now, which might be certainly more directed. But prior it was opportunistic. So manufacturing, I know, probably is even more vulnerable than healthcare. There's so much been focused on healthcare. I think manufacturing, healthcare is 10, 20 years behind financial services. Manufacturing might be 10 years behind us. So I don't see that. I think those were different groups with different opportunities, bottom line.
Got it. And Mike, I know you just actually wrote an article about manufacturing and construction, thinking about Ryuk and thinking about other things. What do you think here?
Well, John's 100% right. This is an opportunistic crime, but the leaders of these organizations, of these criminal organizations. So first of all, in the manufacturing sector, it is definitely focused as a profit-making organization, right? This is not about social fabric or disincentivizing Americans' trust in the government or anything like that. All right, this is about pure profit. But again, if you are the leader of one of these criminal organizations, you want to maximize your profit and minimize your effort. And so we just sent a whole bunch of people home to go work. And so that's created opportunities, right? Your crappy home network is real easy to break into. Setting that aside, back in the manufacturing floor, robots are not affected by a virus, right? So there's been a lot of investment already going in, and there's going to be more investment in automation, robotics, et cetera, et cetera. And because a lot of this is new, again, it's a brand new attack surface. And a manufacturing organization, if it goes down, it can be millions of dollars a day in lost revenue. So, right, there's a strong financial incentive to get it cleaned up as quickly as possible. What I read was that in the last year, I think 25% of the ransomware events have been in manufacturing, and I don't think that's a well-known fact. I'm taking it at face value from where I read it, but even if the number is 15%, that's still pretty striking. So I think manufacturing's time in the barrel is coming.
Go ahead, Fred.
I was going to say that there's a commonality here that I like to point out with healthcare, and that is medical devices. And we've got to start thinking about keeping those segmented on their own part of the network where ransomware cannot traverse, and start doing things where those devices, which tend to be a little bit less secured than maybe some of the other systems we have, so they can't get infected and therefore infect other parts of the network. We need to start segmenting these just like in manufacturing. All these robots, the factory floor operational technology, those should all be running on different subnets, different VLANs, behind different firewalls.
Yeah, Fred, in the spirit of everything is connected to everything else. And, going back to this petcha, not petcha thing, right? There are often attacks that are launched that are intended for a particular target that hit and then spill over into lots of other organizations. So, you can see how easily this IoT thing could happen with a research institute that's doing some sort of automation with lab equipment that then winds up, in manufacturing. It's not unusual. You're connected to lots of other organizations, and a risk borne by one organization or accepted by one organization is a risk that's borne by everyone else connected to them.
So Brooke asks a question in the chat here related to that OFAC guidance. That's about whether you're allowed to pay the ransom, whether it's illegal to pay the ransom. John, what do you think?
So I know they were well-intentioned. I used to deal one of the programs I ran was the National Terror Financing Program, Counter-Terror Financing Program when I was at FBI. Had to deal with OFAC quite a bit. What they were trying to do is make sure that, I think that was aimed more at these illegal money handlers and these illegal coin exchangers that were facilitating ransom payments. However, what's happened is now insurance companies have to worry about, and victims potentially, if they pay the ransom, are they legally or regulatorily exposed to OFAC violations? And there are criminal violations. The bottom line is that that guidance only applies to OFAC sanctioned designated entities, OFAC designated entities. So the vast majority of ransomware gangs or infrastructure is not designated. The other thing to keep in mind is that per the guidance, if you contact law enforcement early, timely, during the event, whether the insurance company or the victim, that is considered a significant mitigating factor to reduce your exposure to reduce your regulatory exposure. So bottom line, another reason to contact law enforcement, FBI, DHS, law enforcement. So I would take it FBI or Secret Service at a minimum to comply with the guidance, and then you should be all set. And the bottom line, is what I tell folks: is it illegal to pay ransom? No, it's not. And because even if you paid an OFAC designated entity as a victim, you're paying under duress. Mm-hmm. Somebody has a digital gun to your head. You cannot, my personal opinion is, you cannot be held criminally responsible for that.
Drex, what are you hearing from inside hospitals there about what they're, are you hearing from folks about what they're thinking about this OFAC guidance?
I think, John hit it on the head. I think they're concerned. I think it's another one of those things that has really good intentions, but unfortunately can create unintended consequences. And when people read it, they can interpret it in a lot of different ways. John's explanation, I think, just now was excellent. And there's something missing in here, right? That if you're going to pay ransom, and if it's interpreted as if you pay ransom, we're going to penalize you, there has to be something in there that is from a cybersecurity perspective, you have to be this tall to ride the ride. And the government hasn't created that, whatever it is, Regional Extension Center for Cybersecurity or something that kind of helps everybody get to a common level. And so they're missing components. And, I hate the unintended consequences that come with some of these things.
And off ransom for a second, but staying on ransomware and attacks, Drex, you actually worked on in the first half of this year a report, and you're now working on the second one about breaches. And unfortunately here, this Ryuk thing shows you might have been right, or you were right.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's an unfortunate thing. We certainly don't want to be right in the situation, but we did a report. We issued it in July. It was over the last 2 years, looking back at the data over the last 2 years from the Health and Human Services Wall of Shame. We divided the data up into 6-month increments. And what we found out is that in the first half of 2020, compared to the previous 6-month period, the number of reports were down 10% and the number of individuals affected, the records that were breached, was down nearly 83%. And we scratched our heads over this quite a bit. How could that possibly be? What are we really, that much better at cybersecurity? And what we wound up coming to conclusion-wise was that we think the distraction, all the stuff that I listed earlier that happened during the pandemic, all those distractions probably meant that there were health systems and organizations that were breached and just didn't know it yet. And what we've seen in the next 3 months, July, August, September, October now, is that there are a lot of organizations who are admitting that they were breached in February and March and April, and that they're just now figuring that out and announcing it. So we predicted that we were going to have a really bad second half of the year, and it turns out we're having a really bad second half of the year. And I think the other thing I would add to that is that Mike Hamilton, made a prediction that the big motivator behind this was money and not necessarily access to the records. It was about making a quick buck. And unfortunately, Mike's been right too.
Yeah, monetizing health records is getting to be more and more difficult because of the glut of them out there and because of the application of a health record that's been disclosed in an unauthorized way. That's a onesie-twosie thing, unless you're an insurance company and you can buy a whole bunch of them and use use the data for your company purposes. So I think it's the motivation of the actors has gone from stealing records to just flat out extortion.
Yeah. And hey, a couple of things to know in the chat here. One in the chat is the link to Drex's breach report is there. Also, as we get toward the top of the hour here, I also want to ask people if they'll take a survey about this panel. We're trying to figure out whether to do more of them, whether this is helpful to people. So I'm putting a link in there to that. So it'd be awesome if if folks filled that out. Help us and then help others. We talked a little bit earlier about the insurance companies. One thing we didn't talk about was the legal implications. If you get hit with Ryuk ransomware, are people going to sue you over shutting down the hospital? What are your legal responsibilities, John?
Well, they will sue for sure, regardless of whether they're right or you're in the right or but they will sue. Even over regular breaches, we've seen almost immediately class action suits filed. And of course, the plaintiffs try to prove some type of harm. But when we go through the exercise with leadership, we say, expect this. This is normal. You and your cyber insurance should account for that. Again, you would have to look at, of course, they're going to try to claim negligence and some harm to the patient in terms of either a physical impact as a result of delayed care, or because of the stolen health record, there was some other, financial harm, identity theft. But when I talked to the regulators in the government, I said, again, all our focus is on the victim, the hospitals. What did they do wrong? Where was their negligence? What's their exposure? Why, did they comply with the OFAC regulation? Are they HIPAA compliant? Joint Commission have said, and I've posted an article today on LinkedIn, time to focus on the attackers. All right. So the hospitals are the victims, and it's time to say, no matter what they do, the hospital does, inevitably they will be breached, right? No organization is breach proof. So, but bottom line is they will absolutely face legal exposure. Whether those cases are successful or not is another issue, but they'll have to be defended, and there'll be a cost to that.
Yeah, Fred, I know you've been you've been thinking about the legal side of this too, especially being involved in your team being involved in so many IR cases. Thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think there's actually a unique opportunity here. If we have a sample size of 400, and we can start understanding what is the level of the hospitals that were actually resistant to this, the ones that were not, what kind of common controls did they have in place? We have a great experiment. Not that I'm happy that anybody's part of it, but we have a great data set being built here. And I think we need to look at this data set, understand what does this mean about the minimum level, and think about that standard of care and whether we're actually helping people get there. So I think that's what I see here as an opportunity to really understand some things at a pretty detailed level.
Yeah, and Drex, I know you've thought about it from a hospital standpoint too. How do you think about that legal risk?
Mike and I were talking about this earlier, and I worry that ambulance chaser type lawyers never waste an opportunity like this, and that they will sue not only the health system, but they may very well decide that maybe there's information somewhere inside that organization that allows them to blame and sue the other executives, or allows them to blame and sue the board. Now, there's insurance involved in all of that, but when it comes down to who do you sue to try to get money, everybody winds up being involved in this. So it's a sad and unfortunate situation, but I mean, that's I think the reality of what we're facing. Everyone is at risk, not just organizationally, but maybe individually too. And again, like John, I'm not a lawyer. I just have seen enough of these plays to know how they end.
Yeah. So Eric asks a question, Mike, if you could answer it quickly, and then we'll go to final thoughts here.
Sure.
It says, along with the uptick in ransomware attacks against healthcare and manufacturing, has there also been an uptick in attacks against law enforcement facilities or utilities?
I'm not familiar with any against law enforcement. I know there is some cyber activism that's going after law enforcement, but that's a completely different thing. In terms of utilities, I will tell you that I know of one water utility in a major metropolitan area that was compromised a few days ago. I don't know what it is because I'm not authorized to know that, but yeah, it's going down.
Okay. So in 2 minutes left, let's go to everybody for just final thoughts here. John, let's start with you. Final thoughts for folks here?
Yeah. First, thanks for inviting me to chat for a little bit. Great panel. Take the threat seriously. Test those incident response plans, your backups. And I did want to point out to everybody, there are 2 versions of the report that came out last week. It's the 22-page report that came out on Friday, even though it's dated the 28th of October. That's the one that has everything in it. It's we posted on our site. So thanks, everybody.
Mike, go ahead.
If I was going to give you one recommendation, it's try to evaluate whether or not your people that are working inside your health sector organization actually need external email or email at all, and talk about a policy of personal use on a personal device. Even if you can't technically enforce it, say it.
Fred, go ahead.
Yeah. So I hate using this term, but new normal, folks. This is going to keep happening. If you're not getting good at response and good at detecting these things, it's going to happen over and over again. So learn as much as you can from this, especially if you weren't a victim, so you can minimize the damage next time.
And Drex, as you give your final thoughts, I put up email addresses here for Fred, Mike, and Drex. John didn't tell me I could put his email address up here, so I didn't. But he also told everybody to go to his LinkedIn, so just go friend him on LinkedIn and you can ask him stuff. Drex, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, make sure you know all your counterparts in this. Make sure you know the organizations across town and who's responsible there. Make sure you have your FBI friends on speed dial. You need to make sure that you have all these contacts as part of your incident response plan. And, same as everyone else. Thanks for having us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thank you to John and Mike and Fred and Drex. People in the audience are saying how much they appreciated this. Just a reminder to please take the survey. The link is over on the right there in the chat. Stay safe, stay secure. As the head of marketing for CI Security, I'd be crazy if I didn't say, let us know if you want to chat, email any of those guys, or you can actually send a note at the bottom of the survey. But this is really about defending everybody, staying secure, and we're all in this together. Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
And vote.